The galaxy had a name for humans, whispered across 100 star systems in a dozen alien tongues. They were called the unyielding ones, soft-bodied, short-lived, laughably fragile by the standards of interstellar civilization. No natural armor, no venom, no enhanced senses, no subspecies bred for war. And yet, every species that had made that mistake once, of underestimating them, had never made it twice. Kale hadn't planned to become a legend that day. He had simply been doing his job. The Vorkai were an ancient warrior caste, 7 feet tall, covered in chitinous black plating that could deflect low-caliber rounds, with forearms built for violence and amber eyes that could track movement in near-total darkness. They had conquered 23 worlds before joining the Galactic Accord. They were respected, feared, celebrated. They did not ask for help. That was their first problem. The second problem was the mining station. Station Kel 7 orbited a dying red dwarf on the outer rim, a refueling depot for deep space freight vessels, not a combat zone. No one had warned the pirates. 3 Vorkai diplomatic envoys and their families had been aboard when the raiders hit. A blood clan from the Dreth system, 40 armed mercenaries with ion disruptors and no conscience. The Vorkai warriors had fought back immediately, gloriously, the way their culture demanded. 2 had died holding a corridor. The third, a female named Commander Vesh, had taken a shot to her primary limb cluster and gone down in the cargo bay. Her 3 cubs, young ones, barely past their first molting, had hidden in a ventilation shaft while the firefight raged. Kale had been on the station doing what humans always seem to be doing in the wrong place at the wrong time: maintenance work. He was a technician contracted by the Accord to service the atmospheric regulators. 26 years old, average height for a human, with grease-stained hands and a tool belt that had seen better decades. He had no weapon, no armor, no backup. What he had was a schematic of the entire station loaded into his wrist panel, 17 years of spatial problem-solving instinct, and the particular human talent for functioning through fear rather than being stopped by it. He heard the cubs before he saw them, a high-frequency chittering that the translator bead in his ear rendered as something close to "We are afraid. We are alone. We cannot move." Kale had crawled into the ventilation shaft after them. The cubs, he learned later their names were Veth, Ara, and the smallest, Saul, had pressed themselves into a junction point, trembling. They were the size of large dogs in their current form, all black plating and wide amber eyes and teeth that could shear through titanium given another decade of growth. Kale looked at them. They looked at him. The translator bead worked overtime. "I know you're scared," Kale said quietly, keeping his voice low and even. "Me too. But I need you to trust me right now. Can you do that?" The largest cub, Veth, bared her teeth, a threat display, instinctive. Kale didn't flinch. He'd been warned once by a Vorkai cultural liaison that flinching was the worst thing you could do. It signaled prey. Instead, he held eye contact, direct, steady, and waited. It took 11 seconds. He counted. Then Veth lowered her teeth. Slowly. "Good," Kale said. "Stay close. Stay quiet. Follow exactly where I go." He led them through the maintenance tunnels, pathways so narrow even the cubs had to compress their plating to move, while the sounds of battle echoed through the station's bones. Kale navigated by schematic, cutting power to certain corridors to redirect the pirates, triggering a false atmospheric alarm in Sector 4 to draw attention away from their route. He wasn't trained for this. He was a technician. But humans had something the Vorkai cultural briefings never quite captured correctly in their threat assessments. Humans improvised the way other species breathed. It wasn't thought. It wasn't strategy exactly. It was something older, something wired into them from 100,000 years of being the soft, slow, faungless creature on a planet full of things that wanted to eat them. They had survived by thinking faster than dying. Twice, Kale had to freeze mid-tunnel while armed Dreth mercs passed below them through a grating. Both times, he pressed a finger to his lips and made eye contact with each cub in turn. Both times, 3 Vorkai young ones, descended from a warrior caste that had never learned the concept of retreat, held still and silent because a human who smelled of machine oil and old coffee had asked them to. The emergency escape pod bay was on the far side of the station. It might as well have been on another planet. Kale found a different answer. He rerouted them to a sealed freight container, reinforced hull, magnetic clamps, its own oxygen supply for long hauls. He sealed them inside, triggered the emergency beacon on a frequency he'd pulled from the station's distress protocols, then positioned himself outside the container and waited. He didn't hide. He stood there, in the open corridor, with a plasma cutter from his tool belt, a device designed for cutting through hull plating, not people, and waited for the Dreth to find him. 3 of them did. What happened next took 4 minutes and left Kale with a dislocated shoulder, 2 cracked ribs, and a burn along his left forearm. It also left 3 Dreth mercenaries unable to continue their contract. Kale didn't know exactly how he did it. He never could reconstruct it cleanly afterward. He just remembered thinking, very clearly, those cubs are behind that door, and I am in front of it, and that is simply how this works. The Accord rescue team arrived 19 minutes later. Commander Vesh, her injuries stabilized, was brought to the freight container as the medics cleared the area. She was still moving on 3 limbs, her primary cluster immobilized, when Kale opened the container and the cubs came spilling out. Beth ran to her mother, then Ara, then Saul, the smallest, who stopped halfway, turned back, and pressed a small, plated head against Kale's hand. The warrior mother watched this. Kale scratched gently behind the ridge plate where Saul's equivalent of an ear sat, the way he'd been doing for the last hour to keep them calm, and Saul made a sound the translator couldn't render except as safe. Commander Vesh stared at the human. He was a mess. One arm cradled against his chest, uniform scorched, blood from a cut above his eye drying in a dark line. He looked like exactly what he was, a maintenance worker who had been broken down and not quite stopped. "You are the one," Vesh said. Her translator gave the words a formal cadence. "You kept them alive. They kept themselves calm," Kale said. "I just knew the tunnels." Vesh was silent for a long moment. In Vorkai culture, this silence had a name, Kethvora, the pause before a reckoning. It was used before battle, before judgment, before the acknowledgement of a debt that could not be counted in ordinary currency. "You are small," Vesh said finally. "Yeah," Kale agreed. "You have no armor, no natural weapon, no enhanced capability." She seemed to be working through something. "And yet you placed yourself between predators and my blood. Someone had to. Why?" The question wasn't hostile. It was genuine, the inquiry of a warrior caste that had built an entire philosophy around strength, trying to understand a creature that had none and had done it anyway. Kale looked at Saul, still pressed against his leg. "Because they were scared," he said simply. "And I was there." Freya heard the story 3 weeks later, in the Accord dispatch office on Vareth Station, where she worked as a diplomatic liaison. She had heard many stories about humans, her own people, filtered through alien perspectives. Most of them had a similar shape. Humans, the stories went, were inexplicable. They were soft, and they did not stay down. They were afraid, and they moved anyway. They were alone, and they chose, every single time, to be the thing standing between a danger and whoever needed protecting, not because they were the strongest, but because they were there. Freya read Kale's incident report and found herself smiling at a line buried in the Vorkai commander's formal testimony to the Accord Council. "I have faced 40 enemies on 14 worlds," Vesh had written, "and I have questioned the value of many things I once considered certainties. I did not think the hairless ones were capable of this. I was wrong. I request that this human be formally recognized under Vorkai honor debt tradition. He is not large. He is not armored. He does not look like what he is. What he is one of us." Freya set the report down. Outside the viewport, the stars burned cold and ancient and indifferent. Somewhere out there, a young maintenance technician with a dislocated shoulder and grease-stained hands was probably already back at work, fixing something that needed fixing, in the right place at exactly the right time. That was the thing about humans. They always seemed to be.